Clyde Pilkington here.
I'm Steve Hill.
And you are joining us in our large family dining room. And at the end of the dining room, of course, we've got some books here. There's books all over the place here. But this is something that we have hanging in our dining room. We've had it here for quite a few years. And it's Romans 11:36. And Romans 11:36 is like bedrock, a passage of Scripture to me. And folks that we study with and fellowship over time, they begin to see how important Romans 11:36 is.
Yeah, it's the most all-encompassing verse in Scripture, I'd say.
So this is why we have it hanging up right in our dining room. We wrote over top of it, I call it the divine cycle. And it's simply stated, God states it so simply, all is out of God and through God and to God. And it represents, we call them the three prepositions of sovereignty.
Yeah, so the Greek here for out of is the word ek. So Paul tells us in Romans that all things have their origination come out of God. At first, there's just God. There's nothing else. He's not created. And everything in creation comes out of him as the original source.
And this is the truth of Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. And that's all there is. And he is it's out of him. He's the origin and the source of everything. There is nothing in God's creation that didn't come out of God. Absolutely nothing.
Including evil.
Including evil. God says, it's interesting. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And yet Isaiah 45:7 says that he creates evil as well. So that's important. And then the next Greek word that we have, preposition.
We have dia, which means through. All is through God.
And this not only speaks that God is the origin and the source of all things, but he's involved in the course and the details. It's not like that God created things and started them spinning and moving, and he created beings and he says, okay, now we're going to see what they're going to do. Not only is everything out of God and he's the source and the origin, but everything is through God. So every detail of the entire course of creation, all the events, all the activities, God is the source of them. He is operating the all.
Yeah. When I hear the word through in this verse, I think controlled by or operated by. So God is in complete control here of all of the things that were out of him that he created here.
Oh, absolutely. And so I guess what you're understanding is that we fully embrace the sovereignty of God. I mean, the absolute sovereignty of God. There is no element, there is no element that does not originate in him. There is no element that does not operate through him in every single aspect and detail. Now, the glorious news is, if you're watching this in the middle of human history or the history of creation, which of course we all are, and you see, and it looks like everything's going wrong, and it looks like things are a mess, and you think, how is any of this ever going to work out? And the glorious news is, not only is it coming out of God and it's operating through God. Here I think about Romans 8:28. For those of us who are called, we are aware that God is operating all, and he's operating it for good, even though it doesn't look like it. And that's really where we're going here, is because we have another preposition of sovereignty over here.
Yeah, to, which is eis in the Greek.
And this is speaking to destination. Creations, God, not only did it come out of God, there's nothing but God, and all comes out of him. And then God is operating all the details of his creation day by day, moment by moment. But it's all going somewhere. It's coming right back to God, and He's the destination. He's the conclusion. He's bringing all back to Himself, so that it's not only God, but it's God all in all.
Right. Yeah. And that's what the scriptures tell us about the redemptive picture and the restoration of all things back to God. So it's not that God had a plan here that got foiled.
Exactly.
This is the main gist here is everything's out of God. Everything is continually, every millisecond of every day, being controlled by God, the good and the apparently bad, and all is for God and going back to God. So, just so you understand what we're saying, when we refer to the sovereignty of God, we don't mean that God is generally in control of His creation and that man has some free will and we make some choices and sometimes they please God. No. What we mean is that God, as the sovereign creator of the universe, has control over every blade of grass, every grain of sand, every atom. And just to paint a picture here, the analogy, I remember I heard this one time and it's always stuck with me because it's so profound. So the analogy is in size, an atom is to a golf ball as a golf ball is to the earth.
Wow.
That's how tiny an atom is. And those are the building blocks of all matter and all energy that's making up all things. And all of that originated out of God. And every atom and every subatomic particle is being controlled every millisecond by God. And it's all for Him and going back to Him.
And this is a truth that Paul repeats a number of times in his epistles, that all is out of God. God is operating all according to the counsel of His own will. So this is a glory. I tell you what, when faith lays hold of Romans 11:36, your life will never be the same. It'll be a life, it can be a life of peace and a life of rest in a sovereign creator who's got every single thing under control. Everything's just as it should be. Nothing's just a shade off one way or the other. And God's going to bring it all to this glorious consummation. And of course, when we talk about God, it's not some little old man with some gray beard up in heaven somewhere. It's this powerful force.
Right. Yeah. So God, we know from Scripture, is invisible. And Jesus is called the visible image of the invisible Father. And He says, no man has ever seen the Father.
Right. He's spirit. God is spirit.
Right. So when we read these passages in the Old Testament, for example, the Hebrew Scriptures, about God visiting certain people or, speaking to them, well, that may be God taking on a different form, but the essence of God is something we really can't begin to fathom now. But I tend to think of energy, and it's interesting. Even in science, the first law of thermodynamics that earthly scientists have discovered is that energy that makes up all matter, all the stuff we can touch and feel and see, and all of that is made up of energy and these atoms, and all of that it can't be created and it can't be destroyed. Same exact things are true of God. So
it's because that energy is the manifestation of God Himself.
Right.
Now, and we're not saying that God is just energy, but He is the God of love and the God of intelligence, who designed us and who made us. He's the creator, and He's powerful, and it's all coming out of Him. No one can in any way interfere with this glorious plan of God.
And He does, so that our human minds can at some level grasp Him.
Yes.
We read things like, human characteristics and God being personified, how He has open, outstretched arms, and Christ is sitting at the right hand of the Father. And Jesus says, if you want to see the Father, look at me.
Exactly.
Because He's the visible image of the invisible Father. So the main thing, though, is if you've historically thought about God as a long gray-haired beard, the Sistine Chapel Michelangelo version of the Father, That's not really what God looks like, right? Because God's invisible. But he's much, much more grand. And the scale of that and the infinite universe, is just beyond us now. So we'll
Now, yeah, now what we have is we have on either side of our board here, we have a couple smaller boards, and we're going to move them in for the purpose of the video, and we're going to show you how we take this great truth and we apply it to the lives of our family. We remind our family about how this great truth works in our daily life.
Yeah. So we'll put them up here now, and we'll be back with you in a second.
Okay, here we are. Now we've got the charts up. These two lists hang up on either side of our big chart, and they're just a reminder of our family of what it means to truly believe that all is out of God and all is through God and all is to God. Now over here's a list of things: anger, complaining, disappointment, discontent, dissatisfaction, frustration, grumbling, irritation, murmuring, resentment, whining, and worry. All of these things describe various forms of what happens when we don't believe everything's out of God and that God is operating all things and they're all going somewhere with precision design.
And we're not saying that you can't still feel these things, even with a full recognition of that fact. But we can have peace knowing that even all of these things that are so seemingly bad are under the perfect control of a loving Father who's working all things together for our good.
Exactly. So when we're about to get angry about something that's happened in our life, or we're about to complain about something, we just realize, wow, that's actually out of God.
Whose quote is it you have in the office? Who says that? He says, "I was about to complain."
Oh, you know what? We're going to pause the video,
and
I'm going to go get it. In my office, and Steve reminded me of that. In the office, I got all these little sheets of paper hanging on the wall, where I print out little quotes that mean a lot to me. And this is Thomas Watson in he's born in 1620 and died in 1686, and he says this: "I was going to complain, and then I remembered He is the source of all things, even my disappointments." I love that.
Yeah.
And see, this is how this truth works. It'll turn all of these things, into caring and being compassionate and being content and gentleness and graciousness and joyful and kind and loving and patient and peaceful and tender and thankful, knowing that all is out of God and all is through God and all is going to God. It'll create these things in us rather than these things. These are actually the works of the flesh. The flesh create these, and it is the God's Spirit in us bringing forth this glorious truth of God will convert these things. So just like he said, I was going to complain, and then I remembered that He's the source of all things, even my disappointments. And then all of a sudden, our complaint can turn into thanksgiving. And so, like Stephen said, it doesn't mean that we don't get angry every now and then or feel the need to complain or be disappointed. But you know what? The truth of Romans 11:36 can mean that what I'm getting ready to be disappointed about, I'm reminded by faith that that's the decree of God. And instead of being disappointed or angry or frustrated, I can then become thankful and caring and tender and gentle.
Yeah. And don't get us wrong. This, Paul said he fought a flesh versus spirit battle constantly, and even said that the flesh often won out. So none of us are perfect, and none of us are going to ever not feel these things at all. And sometimes these things can be really, really powerful, depending on the circumstances in life.
Sure.
But when you understand the truth that we're talking about, the complete, total sovereignty of God over every tiny piece of His creation, and that all of it's working out for good in the end, and for our personal good, then this gives us an overwhelming sense of peace leading to all the things on this side.
Oh, it certainly does. And no wonder Paul said, that he had learned, and it is a learning, it's the learning of faith. He had learned in whatsoever state he was, therewith to be content.
And he said, he learned to say that it was least trifle to him what men thought.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because we've always got to have a God-centered attitude. And Romans 11:36 and verses similar to it are exactly what remind us of that fact. It's a simple truth, but it's incredibly profound. And knowing that can bring you so much contentment and and just peace.
Absolutely. Listen, this is a big verse to us in our family, very important. I hope that it will become important to you in your life as well. Thanks for joining us in the video today. And down below, we'll give you some resources along these lines that'll help you study more about the divine cycle.